welcome to Weekly Reddit. In today's episode of r/ProRevenge, how fast was the heathen going when he backed into ya father? Cross-posted from Malicious Compliance. I did what my mum told me to do, and got revenge. How fast was the heathen going when he backed into ya father? Cross-posted from Malicious Compliance. I'm not sure this strictly could be called pro-revenge. But then, I wasn't sure it could be called Malicious Compliance, but it was well received and suggested to cross-post it here. If this was a mistake, just let me know and I'll remove it. Also, I'm going to be deliberately vague about places and exact dates, for reasons that will be apparent shortly. Any and all dialogue is to the best of my memory, and probably sounds a lot cleverer than it really was. But isn't that always how one remembers these things? Background: this was back in the 1990s. I'd recently been medically retired from the military and was attending college in Texas. My wife was working in her chosen field while I did my level best to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Anyway, one day I left the campus, going around the backside to avoid the traffic. I was heading over to pick my wife up for lunch and ended up sitting behind another car at a stop sign. The car in front of me was a brand new Chevy, one of their little sexy models. The actual trade name escapes me at the moment, in candy apple red, being driven by a fairly new blonde, also a little sexy model, whose name will also slip by unuttered. I sat, an old sailor in an old pickup, just listening to the radio and thinking about lunch, when the Chevy drove into the intersection. And then stopped. I didn't think anything of it, so I hadn't done more than put my hand on the gear shift in preparation of pulling up, when suddenly, with a suitable squeal of tire, the Chevy shot back at me. I slapped the shift into reverse but was too late. The little Chevy smashed into the front of my truck, doing around 25 to 30 miles per hour. After a second, I cut my engine, got out of the cab, and walked around to the front of my truck. The good news was that I could see that I wasn't going to have to worry about that loose belt squeal anymore. The bad news is that the front of my little pickup was pretty much totaled. Grill drove back into radiator, water all over the pavement. Headlights smashed. I bent down and noted that there seemed to be oil leaking as well. With a sigh of total incomprehension, I walked further up to the passenger door of the little red Chevy and its blonde driver. I was pissed, but not enraged. I guess I was still trying to figure out exactly what had happened and why she'd ended up stopping in mid-turn and put it in reverse like that. I looked through the tinted window and she was on the phone, talking agitatedly to someone. With all the cell phone silliness I'd seen since leaving the military, seeing her yapping on one really didn't surprise me. Although, had I thought about it, I should have wondered who, exactly, she was calling. Instead, I tapped on the window and she turned a bland face to me. Then screamed into the phone, loud enough to penetrate the glass, "Oh my God, he's got a tire iron." Naturally, I spun around and looked behind me. Then the nickel dropped. I turned in a slow circle and noted that there were no businesses, houses, or apartments in view, nor was anyone on the sidewalks or walking down the roads. For that matter, the only traffic was several blocks away in any direction. Her little car was sitting at the stop sign, almost exactly where it had been when I pulled in behind her. I stepped back and looked at our vehicles. Yup. It looked for all the world as if I'd rear-ended her. Damn. The little bitch had set me up. I quickly walked back to my truck, thinking as fast as I could. Any minute now, a police car was going to show up, called by the little blonde, expecting to find a crazed man with a tire iron. And I dearly needed to not be that man. I pulled my tire iron out from behind my seat and threw it as far as I could into the nearby field, then jumped into my truck. I was a slim chance, but it was the only hope I had. I made sure the truck was in reverse, then belted myself in, slammed my face into the steering wheel, opened my door, and heard sirens not too far away, and half slumped out the open door at an uncomfortable angle. I went limp just as the police car screeched to a halt. I ignored the policeman screaming at me to get out of the truck, trusting that my limp body would not move him to open fire. He finally edged his way over, noticed the bloody nose, tugged at an eyelid. I made sure my eye was well rolled up, and let me drop back into position. I stayed limp while he checked on the blonde, who was near hysterical with fright over the lunatic with the tire iron. Until she saw me, that is. I'd hoped that her rear view mirror was as off as it looked, or that she'd be too involved with concocting her own story to notice what I was doing. At seeing my body hanging limply below the driver's door of my truck, she stammered to a halt. A second set of sirens had been getting closer, and the policeman told the now silent blonde to stay in her car. A few seconds later, someone cut me out of my seatbelt and laid me on the ground. A competent set of hands checked my vitals, and, within a few seconds, a harsh and demanding smell flooded my clotting nose. I fought it for a few seconds and made a pretty good display of a man coming around after having been knocked out. I immediately made to throw myself to the side. And stopped, half being restrained and half staring wildly around to see what had happened. The medic sat back when I sat up, looked at the front end of my truck, and moaned, "What the fuck did that idiot do to my truck?" He told me to lie back down and started asking me professional questions about where I hurt and could I feel my toes and all that crap. Every few seconds, I'd look back at the wreck and mutter about the idiot backing up like that, and what the hell had he been smoking? Little bits of angry stuff. The policeman, having gotten the blonde's statement, walked over and asked me if I felt up to talking. I said I felt fine, just a little sore. The medic okayed it and helped me to my feet. I gave the officer my license and proof of insurance and included my retired military ID card, then sat on my front seat and, as if I just noticed it, asked what had happened to my seatbelt. He explained that I had to be cut out of it and I shrugged. Just another item for his insurance company to pay for, I guess. What the hell was his story, officer? Why did he back up that way? The policeman looked sharply at me and asked me what I meant. I described exactly what had happened, but concealing the fact that I knew that it was a female driving the Chevy and kept referring to her as him. After I got done and he'd finished writing it all down, he asked if I had any proof. Proof? What do you mean, proof? I frowned at him. Then let my jaw drop a bit. Hey, wait a minute. You ain't telling me that guy. That idiot is saying that I did this, are you? He admitted that the other driver's story was that I'd rear-ended her, not him, and then threatened her with a tire iron. I frowned again and informed him that I didn't have a tire iron, that it was sitting in the garage of my house, a couple of hours away. I moved aside as he searched the cab of my truck, and caught a lucky break when he noticed, without my having to point it out to him, that my truck was still in reverse. He got out of my cab, frowning, then asked me to stay where I was and walked up to the Chevy. He then asked the blonde to step out of her car and, when she'd done so, leaned into the open driver's side door. After a few seconds, he stood back up and asked the girl to repeat her statement of what happened. It was a marvelously teary bit of acting, but she almost blew it by being somewhat puzzled when he didn't react. Instead, he asked her to go on and describe everything that had happened after the accident and everything she'd done then. She backed down from the tire iron story, saying that it might have simply been reflection on her window, but insisting that I'd at least beaten on her window and that I'd simply been putting on an act for their benefit. The policeman looked over at the medic, who slowly shook his head. Years of doing search and rescue might not have done much good for me, physically, but I sure as hell know what an unconscious man acts like. The policeman then asked her if she tried to drive away or had she immediately shut off her engine. She said that the engine had died and, no matter what lies I'd said, that she'd never tried to leave the scene of the accident. The policeman nodded once and asked the medic to step over. He then asked the medic to sit in the Chevy and confirm that it was in reverse. I love smart people. I didn't even have to suggest he check. When I last saw the little blonde, she was honestly crying. She was also handcuffed and being driven away, arrested for making a false police report, some illegal mumbo-jumbo about trying to run a con, and, my favorite part, assault and battery. Once she'd realized that she'd blown it, about the same instant she was handcuffed, she started weeping and explaining that she didn't have the money for the payments on the car, and that her only option was to fake an accident. But that I'd been faking, too, and hadn't been injured. You gotta believe me. She wouldn't lie about that. I signed my name to an almost letter-perfect statement of events over at the police station, being careful to never mention in my own statement about how my nose got banged up, or how I'd ended up unconscious and hanging out of the door. The arresting officer's report, as well as the EMT's, had already noted that it appeared that I'd either been partially ejected by the impact or might have been trying to get out of the truck at the last moment. I've always believed that one should never sign one's name to a false statement. Wisest, in the long run, don't ya think? Turned out that her car insurance was good, however, and they paid for my little pickup's repair. The damage wasn't as bad as it originally looked, thank God. A little front-end work, a new radiator and assorted other dinged or dented gizmos, a little cosmetic surgery to make her outside look right once more. Hell, the mechanic is even going to toss in a full overhaul, including fixing that damn fan belt. I had to drive a loaner for the next week, also care of the blonde's insurance, and the irony of this will make you laugh, it was a little red Chevy. Nice car and my wife and I had a ball riding in it, but way too expensive for a guy like me to drive every day. Hell, a car that nice might have made me try something stupid to make the payments. P.S. The title is the punchline from a fairly appropriate joke. Extra points if you can identify it just by the punchline. Edit, just heard my little tale of silliness read on YouTube by somebody named Mr. Edit. I guess I've made it big time. I did what my mum told me to do, and got revenge. Disclaimer, this story is not meant to belittle single mothers nor people with mental illness, and yes, I do love my mom, but this was a story about how things can come back to bite you. So just some backstory here. My parents divorced when I was just in kindergarten, so no more than 6. My mom got full custody of us and she suffered from mental illness. I believe she has borderline personality disorder, and she was also a typical narcissistic parent. Anyway, ever since the divorce she would always tell us how it was not her fault we didn't have enough money for things and blame my dad. Example, if there was nothing to eat for breakfast and we complained like small children do when they were hungry, she snapped, "It's your father's fault, so cry to him." I just learned never to complain and do without, and spent my childhood taking care of her. My sister and I were trained from when I was about 8, my sister 10, to come right home from school and do our homework and clean the house and take care of ourselves. Don't ask mum to make dinner, make it yourself, and all of the chores so mom doesn't have to do anything. It sounds bizarre, but we know that was normal, as well as being hit and told on a daily basis that we were worthless. It got worse my senior year of high school. My grandma died a few months before that summer, and my mom quit her job and blew through the money my grandma left her before the summer was over. This was close to $75,000 back in 2000. She refused to get another job and kept coming up with excuses not to work. That is, I need a break. Get off my back. I hurt my leg. Etc. While she was going out drinking with her friend and acting like a carefree teenager. So I spent my senior year working hard at school, at my part-time job after school, and pretty much taking care of an overgrown child who refused to work or help out. Anytime a utility shut off or there was no food left in the house, she just griped, "You have a job. Why can't you pay it?" If I brought up the fact that my dad sent her child support, she would just complain that she had my sister's tuition, which I later learn was BS. She would flaunt that child support check and laugh and refer to it as mommy's paycheck. Flash forward to when I am about to choose a college and my mom keeps bellyaching about the costs and of course has zero saved in a college fund. I couldn't afford a private university since I only was offered a partial scholarship, so I decided to go to a reasonably priced and still highly regarded state university. My freshman year I was pretty much able to swing the cost of tuition and room and board. I lived on campus. Since last year of high school I filed my taxes and FAFSA as soon as my W-2s came in, so I had a decent amount of grants. During my first year of college, I almost became unable to receive financial aid for my second year of college. Why? My W-2s were mailed to my home address and my mum, being the caring and supportive mother she was, shredded them and threw them in the trash. I found out because my sister was home that weekend and saw it. My mom denied, and when I came home for spring break and pressed her for it, she lied and said her friend had them. Her friend was a CPA. My sister called my mum out on this bluff by calling the friend who said she did not have any of our tax information. She was very concerned and told me and my sister to request duplicate W-2s and have them sent home, and she will have my mum send them over to me. My mom was pissed that we had checked with her friend and called her out on her bluff, but true to her word, her friend did my taxes for me and my FAFSA. I had offered to pay her or at least babysit for her, but she told me it was okay. I think she knew my mom was mentally unstable and felt sorry for me and my sister. At this point I learned that my mum had not been helping out my sister at all with tuition like she claimed, and my sister had mentioned it to my dad, who had called her out and demanded to know where the child support was going to. My mom insisted he wasn't paying her enough money and that's why she couldn't help us out. During my second year of college my W-2s were once again sent home and my mum once again accidentally threw them in trash. I had to request duplicate W-2s from my summer job not just once but twice because she kept throwing them in the trash. I filed my tax return late that year and as a result my FAFSA was filed late, so I wasn't able to get the full amount I was receiving before. Anytime I complained to her about money or no food in the house, it was, "Complain to your father." Well, the summer before my third year I was burned out on my mum's BS. I was working full-time for the summer and saving as much as I could, but she was refusing to help me out at all while I was home with food or anything. She was pissed that instead of paying the phone bill so she could make long-distance calls to her online friends and spend all day in chat rooms. This was back when we had dial-up. I had the audacity to spend my hard-earned money on a cell phone and pay that bill myself. She told everyone I should just drop out because I wasn't applying myself hard enough. I was in the honors program. And she would play martyr with all her friends about it's so hard when you have kids in college and they eat your out of house and home and come to you for money. At the end of the summer I had saved $1,000, but the school won't let me move into the dorm unless I paid 50% up front, which I was about $10K. I didn't know what to do as all summer the university had told me I was fine, and then on move-in day told me I couldn't move into the dorm. I called my dad in a panic and he spoke to someone who agreed to give me 24 hours. I moved in and the next day my dad showed up first thing with a coffee and a donut for me and told me not to worry, he was going to fix this once and for all. We went from office to office on campus and he co-signed a loan, which he later paid off for me, and then he paid the balance on my tuition for the loan didn't cover. He then took me out to lunch and told me the truth. My mum never helped my sister with her tuition. My sister had graduated the summer before my junior year of college. My sister later confirmed this but was not surprised my mum had lied. My dad had co-signed loan to help my sister out, which he later paid off for her, and my sister was able to get a scholarship and do coup to pay for her last 2 years. He also advised me that my mom was not so poorly off. As part of the divorce settlement, he had to pay the mortgage and property taxes on our house, and even though my sister was now out on her own, he was still paying her the same amount of child support of about $2,000 a month, despite the fact that I was living on campus for 75% of the year and my mom was not giving me a dime. Just to give you some clarification, my tuition and room and board before financial aid kicked in was $15,000 a year, so she could have easily helped me out with school, since after financial aid kicked in, when I was able to get it, the balance was usually $6,000. I was hurt to think my mom was just living off my child support and constantly making me feel guilty for wanting anything or for not being able to cater to her every whim. She would get pissed that I wouldn't come home on the weekends to help her clean the house that I was not living in. I thought about how bad she made me feel growing up and made me feel worthless, when in fact, had it not been for me or my sister, she would have not had a roof over her head after the divorce. He asks me to grant him access to my account so he could prove my mom was not paying for college and that I was. He asked me how I would feel if he took care of college instead of paying my mum child support. Sounded good to me. He even told me I could spend my breaks at his house instead of my mum's. I called my mom and told her that my dad had taken care of the issue and she had no remorse. She told me it was my own fault for not planning my finances better and for pissing away my money all summer. I just played it dumb and said she was right, but pointed out I had done what she told me to do and complained to my dad. A month later my mum called me up pissed. My dad had spoken with the courts and there was going to be a hearing in their divorce case. My dad had proven that my mom had not been paying for mine nor my sister's tuition for college, and that was the very reason my dad was obligated to pay child support till I was done college. Since I was living on campus, it didn't make sense to pay her child support when I was not living at home most of the year and she was given me 1 penny. My dad told the judge he would gladly pay for me to finish college, but he was not going to pay my mum any more child support, no pay the mortgage on the house. If my mum didn't want to take over the mortgage, they could sell the house and I could live with him over my breaks. My mom was freaking out over this and calling me selfish. I just reminded her that my tuition must cost a lot more than what she got in child support, since she was never able to help me with costs of school. She just kept laying guilt trips on me about how I was selfish because she didn't get to go to college right after high school and how she never got to have 4 carefree years of college. I pointed out to her that she had not worked since my grandma died about 3 years ago and that I was working and going to school at that time while she got to live a carefree life. She pretty much ripped me a new one at that point. She tried to get back at my dad by not paying utilities on the house to make it seem like she needed the money. She then told me that the electric and water were now shut off, so if I wanted to come home for winter break I needed to help her out. She had moved in with her boyfriend at his condo. I just told her that I would miss her but that I would just go to my dad's for winter break. She was pissed and cried about how selfish I was for not wanting to come home for Christmas. Side note, the Christmas before my present was throwing out many of my personal belongings. Why? My mom was pissed off at me that I didn't want to come home one weekend to help her clean because to get home I had to take 2 buses, 2 trains, spend $20 one way and wait for her to hopefully remember to pick me up at the train station, which was a whole 20-minute drive for her after I had traveled for 4 to 5 hours because I had finals, and I told her I would help clean for the holidays once I came home for winter break. Her response? She took all of my things, threw them in boxes and threw them out on the front lawn. Most of my things were destroyed by being left on in the rain and I away most of them. I told my mom that I would come and visit her over my winter break once she got the utilities turned on. I told my dad what was going on and he said he and my stepmom and my half-brother and sister were thrilled I was going to stay with them for winter break and he can get me a job in his office as well for winter break. He also called my mom and reminded her that the child support had not stopped. And they were going to list the house in a few months, so what was this nonsense about the utilities being shut off? She was pissed but magically came up with the money to turn them back on. That spring my dad took officially by the court took over my college tuition, and he even made sure I got my full financial aid since he had picked up W2S for me. My mum lost her child support and was told by the judge that she better cooperate with the sale of the house and keep up with the utility bills etc. so it would sail. Her boyfriend moved in with her till the house sold and she moved to another time zone. The real kicker? It was cheaper for my dad to pay college costs than to pay her child support. To summarize, my mom abused and exploited me, and I got my revenge by causing her to lose her child support and free rent by doing what she told me to do for years: complain to my father. No regrets. Edit, so many comments and upvotes. Thanks. Some of you have asked, are things better now? Depends on what you mean. I am not as close to her as I am father and stepmom, whom I grew closer to after college and still close to this day, but I still have a relationship with her. We talk, but I have learned not to trust her because she will let me down. A couple of years ago we were supposed to meet for my birthday and she stood me up. Now I don't include her at all when I plan birthdays or holidays. And some have asked how she treated us growing up. She wasn't 100% bad, but her bad moments were pretty bad. Granted, I have met a lot of people who have had it worse, so I try to remember that. After college, she was trying to pull the same pity cards she had when I was in school. This time she was trying to convince me to move from NJ to TN. She had moved before my last year of college to a different time zone and didn't even bother to tell me or my sister. She just took off. I liked the area and told her I would see if I can find a job and would consider taking her up on her offer to live in her guest room temporarily. She right away started laying me on a guilt trip and I hung up. She then called my sister and complained about how I have a daughter that doesn't want to take care of me. My sister and I both laugh about that. She wasn't even 50, perfectly healthy, and refused to work. No way was I going to move in and take care of her. She pretty much spent most of my adult life in and out of mental hospitals and trying to convince us that either we want to live with her or we want her to live with us. She moved into my grandparents' old house in Philly. They passed away years ago. Didn't keep up with the repairs and had to sell it for less than what she felt it was worth. Wound up staying in various relatives' guest rooms and coming up with excuses not to work, and finally wore at her welcome at so many people's houses that she wound up in the hospital and then in a shelter and now lives in subsidized housing. It's a cute apartment and is like a loft style, but guess what? She still complains about how bad she has it and how no one wants to take her in. Lol. Thanks again for all of the kind words, upvotes, and messages. I know I grew up in a less than perfect situation, but I always remind myself that there are many others who have had it worse. I at least had my father and my sister. And that going through something like that has taught me to be strong and to rely on myself.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up with the best content from Reddit.